where do you think the climate technocracy stands, or the climatocracy, if that's not too ridiculous a word? The kind of global, I guess the global enforcers of this, the people who organize the UN conferences, the people who issue those statements, the people who draft the Paris Agreement, which I've never quite understood what the purpose of the Paris Agreement is. It seems to have very little purpose. Because of Trump is once again in his second administration standing up to those people or tussling with them, having arguments, pulling out of Paris and so on. Do those global institutions carry much weight anymore? Apart from amongst those kind of influential sections of society who go to all these conferences, who issue these statements, but nothing really comes of them. How much of an impact do you think they have on day-to-day politics, day-to-day life?
I think the process of summits to have giant talking shops about this is slowly dying.
Yeah.
An enormous number of people still go to them, but the last one really was a farce, the one in Baku, partly because the host used it to lambast the European Union and others for not supporting his oil industry. But also because Keir Starmer was, I think, the only head of state of a major country who turned up. Whereas 15 years ago you had Obama and Xi Jinping, maybe, I don't know, those kind of people, there in the room at the time. So the ridiculous farce that the feeding frenzy that is that process, the writing of the 5-yearly climate assessments, which became more and more political and less scientific, particularly the summary for policymakers, is pretty badly discredited, etc. So there's good climate scientists working in academia, there's good energy policy people working in business, there are some reasonable people in governments working on things that could help, fusion power, new kinds of nuclear, etc., are, I think, going to make a difference. But what's really happened in this country is that the whole thing has become identified with the unreliables industry, wind and solar, as I don't call them renewables because, hydro and things are renewables. It's the unreliables is the feature of those two, because you can't rely on them for power when you need it. And they are trousering enormous sums. The landowners, I'm a landowner, I don't do this stuff, but I rather wish I did, because I'd be seriously rich if I had wind turbines all over my land. The regressive nature of this industry in terms of sluicing money from the poor to the rich, because it comes off electricity bills, is for me the really shocking aspect of this. And what's so fascinating is you get a green fanatic on social media or somewhere arguing with you, and you say to him, I hadn't realized you were such a capitalist. You really love giving government subsidy to big business, don't you? And they go, oh, don't be so stupid. Of course I don't. But that is actually what's going on here. They've embraced this one industry, which is an extremely capitalist industry with a lot of fundraising and a lot of people taking 2% and 10% along the way, if you like. And, if the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds were to be honest about just how many seabirds and raptors and other birds are being killed by wind turbines, they suddenly would lose a large income here. So cherchez la money here. What is changing, of course, is that in America, that crony capitalist fund flow is being shut off quite rapidly. Chris Wright, who's an old friend of mine, is the energy secretary, and he is making a series of announcements that basically says if you've been making your living out of either renewables or climate, the game's over. Now, that will have its effect because, yes, of course, private foundations will step in to some degree. But I think you will see, if the money dries up in some of these sectors and industries, then it will make a difference.
Okay, so just a couple more quick questions for you. On this issue, the green thing, Trump famously said, drill, baby, drill. And I don't like everything Trump says, of course, but I did quite like that. And, there's still the phenomenon of China. There's the BRICS countries. There are countries that are progressing and developing, even if it kind of offends and horrifies green activists in the kind of post-industrial comfortable West. So is it possible that the climate change idea, the net zero ideology, will just at some point be swept aside by the necessity of progress, by the fact that humanity needs to do certain things in order to sustain life for 8 billion people, and by the way, to improve it for billions of those people who currently live in extreme poverty? Will that kind of necessity wash away the ideology at some point?
Well, I had almost despaired of it doing so, and I now think that Trump's America will or will not be the test of this. Yeah. That if the America goes off booming because it's got cheap energy, which it does have, and which it is on the whole doing, and if you think that, UK GDP and US GDP per capita were pretty similar in the early 2000s. We weren't far behind them. They're now they're certainly a third, maybe even more than that, richer than us. And a lot of that is down to energy cost. Energy cost is such a vital part of an economy because the economy is a thermodynamic phenomenon. It makes useful but improbable structures out of randomness, whether that structure is this conversation or the table I'm sitting at. And for that, you always need energy. So to have electricity prices 3, 4, or 5 times higher in Britain than in America or China is a huge millstone round our leg. And the first political party that really starts to deal with that will, I think, reap dividends, particularly if there's an example from America to show that it works. The bonkers thing about the current Miliband policy is that he's trying to stop drilling in the North Sea, but he's quite happy to buy gas from Norway. It's the same damn field of gas under the seabed.
It's complete insanity.